Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm Jordan Stone, and I'm just an average lady who has an above average obsession with snowboards. Today I'm really excited to be able to talk about the new women's Alternator from Nitro. I got a chance to ride this board over multiple days, actually over multiple times in the season. I got to get on this on and on snow in Mission Ridge, as well as multiple days here at my local mountain, Mount Bachelor. Conditions consisted of perfect groomed to soft packed powder, all the way to spring conditions where you kind of freeze thaw snow in the morning to slush. I also had the unique opportunity of getting to take this board through our Snake Run Rally, which is a local bank slalom course. Fast, tight turns, highly variable. So I really got a good gauge of how this board feels. I tested this board with my Solomon Dialogue boots. They are a men's size 7, so equate to about a women's size 8, and women's Trilogy size medium bindings. The women's Alternator comes in a variety of sizes, a 42, 46, 49, and a 52. I got on a 49. That really felt like the best size for me. This size is designed for a weight range between 90 and 140 pounds. It does have a kind of narrow waist width of about 24.4, which is ideal for about a women's size 7. It still felt okay with my women's size 8. This board was really designed to accommodate smaller sized women, smaller sized feet. If you are someone who is outside of that weight scale or outside of that foot scale, consider looking at the men's Alternator. There's very little difference between the two. So let's talk about what we like and didn't like about this board. Pros: this board is a hard charging, aggressive women's board. It is a super enjoyable turning experience with a wide variety of turning radius across a variety of slopes. And it has really smooth, consistent pop. This is one of those boards that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, and it can almost backfire. You can end up launching much further than you're expecting. Now the downside, the con. This is an aggressive board. It doesn't have a lot of chill. The camber profile coupled with the flex, which is sort of a mid-flex, really makes this board something you need to be on. You need to be aware. There's no laziness with this board. If you are a beginner or intermediate rider, I don't want you to get hurt. All right, let's talk about the shape of the Alternator. Again, this board, the women's Alternator that you're seeing here, is essentially a carbon copy of the men's board. However, there's a few little shifts to this. The shape is the same shape carrying over to the Alternator. This board has a mild taper from tip to tail of about 5 millimeters and is set back in the stance about 15 millimeters. Although it is a directional board with that bigger nose, that narrower tail, that mild taper, when you're riding it actually really feels like a true twin. It's comfortable riding, regular, switch, kind of has that nice centered, and I think that it has a lot to do with that camber profile. For that reason, I categorize this board as a directional all-mountain board. It can be ridden in a variety of situations and conditions, including park, powder, and just groomers. This really is a one-board quiver. This board has true tip-to-tail camber. Look at that beautiful thing there. This really is a full camber with a significant amount of lift in there. Because of that amount of camber on there, this board requires some skill. It requires some force and some weight to really manipulate that camber. When skating, going on cat tracks, skating to a lift, skating off the lift, it can feel a little bit catchy at times if you're not really comfortable with really wading into the board. However, with riding, that camber gives this board an incredibly stable feeling and allows the rider to feel in control even at high speeds. For this reason, I recommend this board for advanced expert riders. So let's talk about Nitro's edge hold. The Alternator has that dual degressive side cut. That essentially means that that side cut is going to be wider in the nose and tail and narrower in the center. By changing the angle of the side cut allows this board to be quick and playful while locking in during the entire duration of a turn. When at higher speeds, I experienced great edge hold. I was able to flex the board and get that full effective edge. When it was slower or when I was traversing a cross hill, I found that this slid out a little bit. It didn't lock in, it didn't maintain that really locked in sensation. I'm not a very heavy person, but I am on the top end of this weight range. I think that that camber just really needs weight and speed to get the full effective edge. On top of that, Nitro doesn't use any kind of disruption in their edge. So there's not anything here that's gonna really grab and hold like you'd see in a Never Summer or a GNU or a Libtech. Even Jones has a slight disruption in their edge. It may be a tricky board for East Coast conditions or conditions where you're seeing a lot more ice or really hard conditions. The board's going to not translate as well into those banked carving turns, and you may get more skidding. This is what I experienced in our icy conditions that are by no means the same, but pretty icy for us where we get a freeze thaw. I had a hard time really locking in unless I had some higher speeds under my feet. Okay, let's talk about the flex of the women's Alternator. This board is pretty much a carbon copy of the men's counterpart with one exception, and that's actually the flex. Men's is at about an 8 out of 10. This is a 7 out of 10, so it really does accommodate a woman's size. That's not to say that this is an aggressive board. It's a full camber board, and so it's got quite a bit of push into that. However, that tail and that nose are pretty flexible. That camber also acts with that flex to make this a really poppy board. You can kind of see how easily it is to manipulate and rebound that board. Stiff, aggressive, but still playful. I had heard that the men's Alternator was phenomenal when it came to transferring from uneven snow, from a groomed to a packed out or off-piste conditions. This held pretty much true for the women's Alternator with one exception. When I took this board out on really thick, I mean really thick, almost set up slush, the board became kind of hard to handle. It was bucky, it was a little jarring. Mind you, the conditions were not ideal. I realize that, but it did feel like a lot of board. I've said this multiple times now, that camber, that stiff profile, does make this board feel like a lot. It has very little chill. You add that and compound it with conditions that are very challenging, it takes a little of the fun out of it. I was surprised that it didn't have that same charging mentality, but when I took it into softer conditions, even tracked out powder, it was a much, much better experience. And it held true to the comments that I had had about the men's Alternator. The Alternator is a directional board. However, the camber on this is actually a centered camber. Because of this, this board actually felt really comfortable riding switch. It felt like a twin. I was able to switch around, ride, connect turns without a lot of instability and insecurity. Now, if you did set this all the way back into that tail, I imagine for powder conditions, if you went switch or you landed switch, you'd want to come out of it pretty quickly because there's a possibility of that shorter tail diving. This board also has V-shaped carbon stringers in it. That's what gives it that snappiness, quickness about the board. It also is what makes ollieing and jumping on this board so enjoyable. When you go off base, flat base or off edge, the board really does compound your energy. I found myself flying through the air much faster and much higher than I was expecting, but it was such a smooth experience that it actually made me want to jump more. I did actually get this board into our mini pipe. Now it's only 9-foot walls, so it's a tiny little pipe. But that stiff nature, that camber, and that pretty okay edge hold made this board really easy, especially in our pipe where one side of the pipe is icy, the other side's kind of slushy. It allowed me to feel pretty comfortable and really work on trying to get out of that pipe and to get a little bit more tricky. I think for an advanced rider, this would do an okay job in the pipe. It is an all-mountain board. It's got some versatility to it. So not a pipe-specific board, but it could do the job. Now, I did not take this board into a jib setting. My only concern with that would be that dual degressive side cut. There's a variety of edge angles on this. For those of you who hit boxes or rails, know that sort of inconsistency of the edge can be a little sketchy. If that's really what you're looking for specifically, look at more of a true twin. You can look at Nitro's Victoria, which is a true twin. and that would be a much better experience on rails. The board also does butter pretty well. We talked about the flex on this board. It's a stiffer flex, and those nose and tail are a little bit stiffer, but it's actually got some good flex through the center of the board. If you really lean back into this, it's gonna give you good butter. And if you detune some of that contact edges here, you can flip around and do butters and land flat ground tricks much easier. Now, I have a need for speed. I love going fast on the board. I like the sensation. I like how I can use my body and lean into the weight and use those kind of centrifugal forces. This board is fast. It's fast to turn, it's fast to carve, it's fast to straight line. It feels so stable and so comfortable that I was able to really just lay it out on multiple terrain without feeling uncomfortable, without feeling super squirrely. Again, that speed lends itself to the camber on this. It lends itself to that sort of setback stance and having everything back into the tail. I just really enjoyed this. So much so that I did take it into a bank slalom race format, and it didn't disappoint. It did pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with those results. Great board if you're someone who likes to go fast, wants some stability, but still wants to be able to feel like they can do quick turns if they need to. They can do quick adjustments, especially in off-piste conditions where you're in trees and you're trying to maintain speed, say through, lighter, lower powder conditions. This board is going to do a great job. The women's alternator is equipped with a centered speed Formula 2 base. With the factory wax, the board had okay base glide. I, of course, wanted to give this a little bit of love, and I did take it into the tune shop, and we got a nice wax on there, weather dependent. I loaded the wax on a little bit more before our racing competition, and it, like most high-end boards, benefited from multiple season-specific or weather-specific waxing. As is with the women's podium at Bomb Hole this year, and again, my own experience with the snake run, this board is fast and it's quick to turn. I gotta love me a limitless board. The women's alternator comes with a dual digressive side cut. What this means is that on this 149, that side cut actually goes from a higher turning radius to a lower turning radius at the center and back to a higher turning radius. On this one, it's a 9.3, a 6.2 in the center, back to a 9.3. Now, this variety of side cut allows this board to have a huge spectrum of turning radius. It can do almost anything. It is quick, it is snappy when you want it to be, but if you really lean back into this and lean into the turn, you can get that nice, smooth cross run carve that a lot of us really enjoy. I noticed that the slight bit of taper actually was really nice as well, because I was able to transfer my weight back and forward on the board during my turns and was able to kind of get a little bit of that laid back surfy feeling and then bring back to the front to get a quick snappier experience. I rode this board more back heavy in thick snow, more centered on groomed, and actually more forward when I did the bank slalom and was in sort of race mode. Every time it seemed to perform really well. Okay, let's talk about this board in powder. So reference stance on this is 19.5. It actually sits kind of back a little on the front of the board and more forward here. If you set this board all the way back, it would increase your stance width to about 20 inches, which is not too bad, but it'd give you almost 3 inches of extra nose. That little bit of extra nose on it makes it a pretty good powder board. It's not a huge amount. It's not a powder specific board, but that mild taper is going to let the tail sink, the nose lift, and keeping that camber kind of back a little bit will help it keep from diving a little. Now, not a powder specific board. It's going to handle in powder. That's why it's an all mountain and not a free ride specific board. When Nitro released the Alternator, it quickly gained traction in the snowboarding world. I myself know multiple skilled riders who have added this board to their favorites list. To say that I was excited to hear of a women's iteration of the board is an understatement. It finally feels like the snowboard industry is taking women's riding seriously and giving those women out there more of an option for an aggressive all-mountain board. Although it is close to the same board as the men's version, it does account for women riders' weight by stepping down the stiffness slightly. maintaining its ability to plow through most conditions while still staying playful and quick. It also has a narrower waist width, which can exclude some women's foot sizes, but also makes the board easier to turn in a variety of terrain. It is fast to turn, fast to straight line, and fast to pop. With proper care and maintenance of this board, it could feel limitless in its ability to navigate the mountain. I hope to add this board to my personal collection as my everyday charger, and it is definitely on my favorites list.